Climate finance is continuing to face some serious political and economic headwinds. Yet the need for significant investment remains, especially as our ever-increasing reliance on data and AI technology will require ever more energy. It's easy to feel like the drive for sustainability has gone into reverse. But is it all as bad as it seems? I'm Georgie Frost, and this is the So What from BCG.
Without government helping you to make it happen, the private sector is not going to see the economic case to make it happen. I talked about private capital having a long-term horizon. It's a 5-year horizon. It's not a 25-year horizon.
Today, I'm talking to Vinay Shandal, who runs sustainable investing for BCG.
So the number is 150 trillion. And when I say that to people, even when I say that to myself, that's just not a number anybody can really get their arms around. Like the US GDP is about 25 trillion. It's about 6x the US GDP. It's also something like $20,000 per person. But that is the volume of money that is required to finance the energy transition. And then you asked, well, where's that money going to come from? And this is where we have a real challenge. Because if you look at that big number I threw out, 150 trillion or 3 to 5 trillion a year for the next 30 years, we're only getting about a sixth to a fifth of that money. So way less than we need to truly make progress towards reducing global emissions sufficiently so that we can hit net zero by 2050. There's not enough money going into the economy to bring the carbon that we put into, or emissions we put into the atmosphere, down to the level that we feel comfortable hitting net zero by 2050.
The fact that we are not coming close to where we think we need to be is obviously a problem. A second bigger problem, perhaps, is that it does feel that there's as I said in the introduction, that the drive is slowing down or even going into reverse. There's a lot of things going on, politically speaking, geopolitically speaking, also the cost of living crisis that we've had to go through, that feels like the climate finance and the climate agenda is very much slipping down the priority list. Is it fair to say that there's a legitimate reason for people feeling rather pessimistic about this space?
You know, Georgie, it's kind of like when you go to like a track and field event, it's really easy to get super pumped about the 100-meter dash. It's quick. It's like, sub 10 seconds. But it's really hard to maintain that level of excitement and enthusiasm for a marathon. Like if you're a spectator in that event, it's really hard to maintain the momentum. And that's kind of what we have here. But you need to maintain that momentum for 30 years. The conviction around we're going to be able to get through this is sometimes hard to maintain. The second issue is people have begun to realize that the energy transition is by definition going to be inflationary, that some of these technologies in the near term are going to be more expensive. The other element, which was, we had an energy crisis. There was, the war in Ukraine, for example, that created a recognition that having an economy that relies largely on intermittent power that's not dispatchable is going to be a problem. And so, we started talking about the three legs of the stool. We used to talk about clean energy. Now we talk about clean energy that is affordable and reliable. And the affordable and the reliable piece sometimes stands in odds with clean. This year that passed, 2024, was perhaps the biggest year in terms of changes in political regimes across the world, where some of the rhetoric is not in favor of accelerating the energy transition. It's held up as being in contrast to affordability and cost of living issues and economic issues. But those of us that spend a lot of time in the climate ecosystem are not unfamiliar with wild cards being thrown in the way. I am a firm believer, though, that there is enough momentum on this that it's going to keep moving. Will it slow down and speed up? Absolutely. This is going to be a volatile journey, but the direction of travel, I think, is clear. I don't think the train is going to go in reverse. And the reason for that is there's already been enough investment. There's already been enough of these technologies that have gotten more affordable. We didn't think solar can get any cheaper. And in 2024, solar got, I think, 30% cheaper than it already was, making it the most cost competitive source of energy or certainly among them. So this is sort of what continues to give me hope, Georgie. But I don't want to pretend for a minute that the introduction of some of these wild cards, the introduction of some of this rhetoric is not going to be a challenge. It is going to be a challenge. But it's a challenge I think we can work through.
You mentioned solar there, but where else do you sense that the momentum is strongest?
Georgie, the fact that China has embraced the energy transition, certainly from an economic standpoint, one of the most powerful motivations is the competitiveness that exists among some of the largest markets in the world. The fact that China has decided to jump with both feet into this race, put more money than any other country into renewable energy, be the first market to build a sub $10,000 electric vehicle that can give a Tesla Model 3 a run for its money. It's the BYD vehicle. That gives me a lot of hope. Why? Because the US, regardless of who's in power, is not going to want to fall behind. And while that's the virtue of this geopolitical retrenchment to localization of supply chains, which is just a really annoying consultant way of saying countries just want to make stuff at home and not buy stuff from the other guy, while it's accelerating the pace of advancement of those technologies because each country is fighting to do it better and cheaper, it's also making it more expensive. Because the reality is, those Chinese electric vehicles, I can't buy them in the US without it paying a massive tariff. I'm not even sure I can get them in the US. And one of the challenges we've seen in this new geopolitical context is, whilst this should be a global challenge where we look at each country's role in a global supply chain, which country is best positioned to extract the lithium, process the lithium, make the battery, make the vehicle, market the vehicle, design the vehicle. That's not going to be the job of any single country, or no single country will do that better than every other country. I think for each of those steps in the supply chain, there is an ideal set of markets. And the problem is this retrenchment that we're seeing globally is more making countries say, well, I'm going to try to do all of that domestically. And that makes us less competitive.
When it comes to climate finance, are public companies better positioned than private to drive this forward?
I think public companies are brilliant partners for private capital. A lot of the technologies we need for the energy transition require two things. A lot of money, because you got to put real steel in the ground. These aren't apps. Private capital can show up and say, hey, public company, you want to buy that thing to make your widgets less polluting? I'm going to put capital here. I'm going to help build the factory or the facility to produce the technology that you can use in your manufacturing process. And that partnership is what's needed, because then you have the buyer and you have the capital. The other side of your question is public versus private. Who's going to work harder to reduce their emissions? Public companies have the unfortunate challenge of quarterly earnings. And a lot of these investments are long-term in nature and don't show up in near-term quarterly performance. And given some of the macro challenges we've had, climate sometimes doesn't sit as item 1, 2, or 3 of the agenda. Whereas for private companies, where the investors have a 5 to 7 year hold period, even though in year 1 or 2, these initiatives to make my companies less polluting or produce less emissions are going to be expensive, over the 5 to 7 year period, I see the payback. I see the benefit. And I know when I sell the company, the buyer will see the benefit, and I'll be rewarded for the investments I make. I can make that bet as a private company with more conviction. And we're seeing it in the data. If you look at the report we put out on private equity, that report talks about how the pace of decarb in private markets is, funnily enough, faster than public markets for the reason I just shared.
Where can the public sector, where can governments, where can regulation play the most useful role in facilitating this, and I think you said it was a collaboration between private capital and public companies. Where are governments best placed to support this?
The immediate response that comes to mind when that question's asked, Georgie, is money. Money is important. I think the bigger obstacle we have is all the regulatory red tape around enabling the production of a lot of these technologies. If you think of the US, right, you have federal level approvals, you have state level approvals, you have local approvals. If you look at any kind of efforts to put green energy on the grid, you have these massive queues, they're called interconnect queues, which means, yeah, you can build renewables, but you're going to have to wait in line to be able to put that green energy on the grid. We have aging infrastructure. There's so much regulatory red tape that gets in the way of people being able to make the investments they want to make. The investment might have a very obvious business case, but it's just such a pain to get it done. It's not easy.
But you make a good point. Like, without governments, or, you mentioned rhetoric earlier, without that kind of support, is this really doable?
No. For a very simple reason, Georgie. These technologies are more expensive in the early days. They need to come down the cost curve. To come down the cost curve, you need to have at-bats to produce them. The first time you produce it, you're going to mess it up. You're going to do it slowly. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to rework. The second time you produced it, it gets better. Third, that's the whole idea of coming down the cost curve. That's why solar is so much cheaper today than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's because we've had so much experience in perfecting the manufacturing process. But in the early days, absent government subsidy or government commitments to purchase whatever it is you produce, or government relaxation of taxes or permitting approvals, without government helping you to make it happen, the private sector is not going to see the economic case to make it happen. I talked about private capital having a long-term horizon. It's a 5-year horizon. It's not a 25-year horizon, unfortunately.
Vinay, what are leaders in this space that you speak to on a regular basis telling you the opportunities, concerns, regulatory impact, for example, in places like the US with the Inflation Reduction Act?
The investors I speak with have formed enough conviction that the IRA is not going anywhere. There will be changes. I think that's clear that there will be. There's speculation about the EV tax credit and what might happen there. There's speculation about some of the clean energy credits. But by and large, so much of the money from the IRA has gone into job creation in not just blue states, but red states. And there's a lot of leaders from red states who are saying, hey, don't tear this up. This is actually creating a lot of jobs in our economy. I think that is giving investors a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about the U.S. market. So I'm very optimistic, and I derive a lot of my optimism from their optimism, because if they're going to put money to work, that's going to be what catalyzes the progress we need toward net zero.
Do you have any advice for those that are willing to put money to work to make the best out of this? Because, they want returns from this too. This isn't charity, is it?
Look, Georgie, advice, it's a big word, because I think a lot of my clients recognize this. But what's different about investing in the energy transition is it's not enough to just diligence the business. You have to catalyze the creation of the ecosystem to enable the success of the business. And that is a fundamentally different way of investing. I can't just show up and buy your company and expect that you, the management team, will make a return. I need to show up, invest in your company, help you build projects, i.e. facilities for the production of the battery or the clean fuel or whatever business you're in. And I have to help you find the buyers for that. And I'm seeing some of my clients build the teams, putting in place the teams that can do this, which is, I'm not just really good at the financial math in terms of whether you're a good company or a bad company. I'm really good at making stuff happen for you, or helping you, the management team, to make those things happen, which is build a facility, find additional capital, find the buyers for the thing that you're producing. If you can pull that off as an investor, I think you have the bench and the capabilities you need to truly create value for your clients, and frankly, to contribute to the energy transition.
Vinay, you mentioned new technology a little bit earlier. AI and obviously new technology will create a number of opportunities, but also, as I mentioned right at the start, a lot of challenges too. How do you see that playing out?
On the one end, I think AI is thrilling in that you can begin to use these technologies to really drive efficiencies across value chains so that you use less, waste less, you intervene earlier. When you do all those things, you not only cut cost and create better outcomes, but you can actually reduce emissions. And we have a really great piece that we authored with Google on the role of AI in accelerating the energy transition. But funnily enough, I mean, the amount of energy being consumed by AI has completely thrown out of proportion our expectations of how much energy we thought we needed. So when we sat there 4 or 5, 6 years ago, forecasting, okay, to get to net zero 2050, this is the amount of energy consumption we anticipate the world needing. Those models have now completely been turned on their head because the amount of energy we actually need is meaningfully higher. The good news is, Georgie, I'm very thrilled about the conversations I've had with leaders at the various hyperscalers, the people who are procuring power at the hyperscalers. When I talk to them on behalf of my clients or in other contexts, they are not walking back their climate commitments. They were among the boldest in terms of making climate commitments. They've been real leaders in procuring of offsets, high quality offsets. Their commitment to staying the course isn't going away. And so what that means is when you have some of the world's most innovative companies committed to this, you can bet they're going to put real pressure on continued innovation in energy markets, whether that's gas with carbon capture, whether that's nuclear, whether that's better grid technology to reduce the amount of energy consumption from AI, whether that's better mobilizing the private sector and public sector to accelerate the introduction of green energy on the grid. Whatever it is, they're going to find ways to make it happen. And to be very honest, Georgie, but for their genuine commitment to net zero, I would be very worried about the impact of AI on the energy transition. But because they're on the other side of the equation, because they're the ones buying the energy, and because they care, I have a lot more confidence that we'll be able to do it with some of the new advanced technologies and do it in a way that's thoughtful and not going to mess it all up.
Vinay, thank you so much. And to you for listening, we'd love to know your thoughts. To get in contact, leave us a message at thesowhat@bcg.com. And if you like this podcast, why not hit subscribe and leave a rating wherever you found us? It helps other people find us too.